Welcome, everybody, to another episode of First Class Fantasy. I'm Theo Greminger. I'm joined, as always, by Billy Muzio, and we have one of my favorite guests. We have Mike Leone from Establish the Run. The young kids would describe him as sharp AF. Mike is a very sharp guy. You know his content from ETR, which is great, but Mike also is a high-stakes player. You find him in the FFPC drafts and a couple FFPC competitors. I've gone head-to-head against Mike. We actually have a big rookie draft coming up pretty soon, Mike, in a triflex. And I know you've gone head-to-head with Billy often. So we're happy you're getting a chance to talk to you on the podcast and going up against you in a draft. But why don't you tell everybody about the great work you're putting out at ETR and also your tremendous podcast at Establish the Edge?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Theo. Nice to be on the show here with you and Billy. And like you said, it's always fun to compete against each other in leagues. But yeah, right now over at Establish the Run, we've got all our ranking sets starting to go live for all the formats that offer best ball. So we've got our FFPC rankings there. I've been grinding through a series on Underdog Fantasy, kind of looking at how to play their Best Ball Mania contest based on last year's data. I'm sure the contest structure will change for this year, but it's always really good to have a firm understanding of what worked last year and why. And I think I'm doing some unique analysis there. So I'm proud of that. We'll be talking about it on the Establish the Edge podcast. And also we'll have Anthony Amico on the Establish the Edge podcast around the NFL draft to get you set up for your dynasty rookie drafts.
Big fan of Anthony Amico as well. Very sharp guy. Those will be really, really good podcasts. Well, we're not going to dive into too many rookies today, but Billy and I, over the last few weeks, have tried to talk about the valuation for Bijan Robinson right now. Where are you comfortable drafting Bijan Robinson without knowing his landing spot? And where do you think he'll end up when we draft in the high stakes events of late August and early September?
Yeah, we've got him at the back end of the first round right now as RB4, which is like pretty close to what his ADP is on FFPC. I think he's technically RB5. Eckler is the guy that we have him in front of, that the market has in front of him. I'm pretty comfortable taking him there. These bets on these running backs that come in with profiles like Bijan with the expected draft capital he's going to get, they rarely, disappoint heavily. I think like historically, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the one that disappointed most heavily. And he was kind of a different case where he wasn't like the best prospect. He just had this amazing landing spot that we ended up overrating a little bit. So I think he's a pretty safe bet there. I like the 1-2 turn if you're going to be taking a running back at that point in the draft. I could see him, depending on landing spot, maybe even move up to the middle of the first round, somewhere where Saquon and JT, I think he could be in that mix. I don't see him getting past the middle of the second round, almost no matter what. It would have, assuming like health and everything, I don't think there's a landing spot that's going to happen where he would fall. I know. What do you guys think?
I love the talent. It's just so hard for me to take him where he's being drafted at currently. I understand he's, a generational talent and he's coming in with expected draft capital, high expected draft capital. But I went through all 32 teams and there's not many scenarios in which I can justify looking at a projection and saying he's going to rise in ADP based upon landing spot. There's very, very, very few landing spots, in my opinion, where his current ADP, where he could technically rise. So I think from a redraft standpoint, we're already drafting him at his absolute ceiling, and even in best ball, where I think that the landing spot could dictate him sliding. And I think if it is a bad landing spot, he could pass that middle of the 2.5, 2.6. I don't see him going outside the second round, even in a worst case scenario. But I think that he's at this point, he's priced out for me to really have a high ownership inside of drafts.
I think I'll take a flip side argument on that, Billy. I think that as this summer kind of moves along, I think it's going to become really apparent how much of a workload he's going to have. And I know that it's difficult for us to kind of foresee, where his landing spot. I personally think it's going to be Atlanta at 8. They're the donkey franchise. They would draft a running back inside the top 10. And I think there's a couple situations where maybe at first there'll be a initial correction where he falls to like that middle of the second. But I think as the summer moves along, you have certain drafters are just kind of ageist when it comes to running back anyway, and they're going to want to push him up. And I think it's become more and more apparent that he is kind of the focal point of whatever offense he kind of lands in. So I think he's the kind of player that drafters steam up, and for better or for worse, I think he's going to end up inside like the top 10. I wanted to keep this going though, and talk about another Atlanta Falcon. Last year, both of you guys avoided Kyle Pitts. I made the mistake of purchasing a few Pitt coins. In the worst times of the year. I had a couple of main events where I pushed the chips in and I got some Kyle Pitts, and it backfired. I wanted to see how you guys are approaching the tight end position right now in your drafts. Mike, what player is the very best tight end ADP wise right now?
Yeah, I mean, I might go back to Kyle Pitts after, I wasn't as in on him last year. I mean, I wouldn't say I completely avoided him, but once his price really skyrocketed, I just thought there was some risk there. But I think at this point, not a ton has changed for him going into last year, other than those risks are more well known and we've seen them come to fruition in terms of the play calling for Atlanta. But I'm still betting on the talent. It's another year, third year guy. And, we're talking in FFPC getting him at the 3-4 turn versus like middle of the second round, right? Or even like the 1-2 turn at times last year. So just a huge drop in price tag. So I like him a lot. There's some other guys that we show like values on later in the draft, like Fryermuth and some other guys. But I just, I get a little bit weary of that third tier of tight ends, right? That the guys that look a little bit better than the later tight ends, just historically that profile has shown that the floor is actually not that much different than the later tight ends and the ceiling isn't quite there. So I still really would like to grab an early tight end in my drafts. I'm fine with any of the top 4 with Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, and Pitts. I'm a little concerned. I'm not as high on Kittle as I think the market is.
I'll answer before Billy does, just so I can hopefully take his answer. I'm with you. I think that those top 4 tight ends are all very exciting right now and kind of the outcomes they can bring. But for me right now, pre-NFL draft, I think it's Darren Waller having a bounce back season in a Brian Dable offense, receiving a high number of targets, and he's just the most pedigreed receiver on the team. I think he could end up having a big year, tight end 7-ish, but I think that he could get into like top 3 overall tight end finish. I think that's in the range of outcomes. Billy, where are you at?
I'm out again on Pitts this year. It breaks down to cost and this offense. Right now he's going on average in the 4th round at FFPC drafts. In my opinion, it's one of the worst 4th round picks that we can take. We're taking.
Be optimistic, Billy.
And I'm gonna be very
like Bijan, doesn't like Pitts. Come on, man, live a little.
So I like Bijan. I just don't like the cost. I like Pitt's talent, just don't like the cost. And so when I look at this, I actually debated Dario this last night on Man vs. Machine, and it just breaks down to their expected pass plays. When we take a look at what they did actually in 2022, they only passed the ball 44.7% of the time. They ran a rushing play on 55.3%. We know that Arthur Smith likes to pound the ball, right? We're expecting this year on the expected pass attempts for my projections is under 500 pass attempts, 497 to be exact. It's going to be bottom 3 in the league again. I have concerns about Desmond Ridder. We already know they have an alpha inside of Drake London, who commanded nearly a 30% target share last year. And then we look at what's available for the rest of this pie. I have concerns with Kyle Pitts giving a return on investment at that cost. And so I think at cost, when you take a look at other tight ends, like Evan Ingram, Darren Waller, who all within, I'd say, close to that tier, they're going 30 picks later. And I would much rather take the upside of someone like Darren Waller, who's going to potentially see 20 to 21% of the target share at a 30 pick discount or 20 pick discount. And I think that I would much rather lean that way.
Well, we're not going to want to draft any Atlanta Falcons when Arthur Smith gets his hand on Bijan Robinson and he leads the NFL in total touches. Mike, I want to follow up with you. Billy and I, a couple weeks back, put out a tight end episode. We highly recommend it. Billy and I went through and we covered each and every draftable tight end. It was a great process, Billy. We got a little weird, talked only tight ends. But one tight end that Billy and I spent a long time on was Travis Kelce. For our FFPC listeners, Mike, in a tight end premium format, where are you comfortable drafting Travis Kelce?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. Last year in our ranks, which I ignored, we had him like 2 just based on the math. and I ignored that. That's where we have him again this year. I'm again probably ignoring it a little bit, but I think I'd take him like 4th overall. I was looking at it. I mean, his ADP right now is 4.1, so I guess that's like right in line. I'd take Jefferson, CMC, and Chase, I think, over Kelsey, and then I would take him at 4. Just kind of thinking through like how I feel about those guys as individual bets and all the positional scarcity. Yeah, I mean, it's just with Kelsey, like how long is he going to hang on age-wise? He seemed completely fine last year. We don't know when that cliff's going to come. As long as he's, not starting to fall off that age cliff, he's going to produce insane numbers because of his talent and because of the offense. There's just like no competition for targets with the best quarterback and one of the pass heaviest teams in the entire NFL. So where did you guys settle on him at?
Real quick. I actually agree with Mike on this one.
Yes.
For me, it's Jefferson and then it's Chase is my clear top 2. And then I'm starting to consider Kelsey at the 103. I think that Billy's going to probably eloquently make an argument for Kelsey as high as 1 or 2, but for me, I'm an ageist, and I don't want to have that player. Whenever it starts falling off, because it's very hard to predict, and I don't think it'll happen, and I don't think it'll happen for Kelsey for 2 more seasons, because I think his game really correlates to getting a little bit older. He avoids big hits. He runs a diverse target tree, but to me, I think Jefferson is the very, very safe, chalky 101. And then Jamar Chase is just that dude. And I want to have as much exposure to him as possible. For me, at the 103, it comes down to it. Like Kelsey probably makes the most sense in an FFPC format at the 103 right now. Billy, anything to add?
Yeah, and this goes back to draft rooms. First, I want to say I agree with everything Mike said. When I ran the numbers last year, he came in with me at number 2. This year, he came at number 1, actually. But when you look at a draft room, you know that you can get Kelsey outside of the 101. You can get him at 102. You can get him at 103, 104, even 105. Seen him go to 106 already this year. Whereas Justin Jefferson is not falling outside the 1 and 2 spots. So if you're in a draft room and you have the 101, just from a standpoint of diversifying and having a diverse portfolio, you have to take Justin Jefferson when you do have the 101 if you want exposure to him. Where Travis Kelsey, you can kind of that question is a little bit more ambiguous, where you can take him at any given spot thereafter. So I think depending upon the volume that you're drafting and in a draft room, you can mix him in anywhere from the 102 to later if you'd like. I think that the conversation needs to be had at the 102 because players like CMC and Chase, you can also get at 2, 3, and 4 at times. And so I think that depending upon the roster construction that you're building, based upon the amount of teams that you're drafting, you need to have that discussion going into the draft if you know you're in the top 5.
No, for sure. And I want to take a step back. We're trying to identify some ADP values, and we're trying to talk about some league winners today. And selecting these sort of players obviously is going to supercharge your fantasy success. But another way of putting yourself in a position to win is simply to avoid the landmines and pitfalls that always seem to present themselves every year in the first and second round. Mike, who is the worst value in first rounds of fantasy drafts right now?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I kind of center in at the running back position because I think that's where you can get in the most trouble early. There's a couple guys in rounds 1 and 2 that were lower on than the market.
It's difficult. I mean,
Sorry if I'm lagging there a little bit. Let me know.
No worries. No, you sound fine now.
Austin Eckler is someone we're behind market on. It seems like he's probably going to be back with the Chargers and just have to play out the final year of his contract. But if he did get moved somewhere else, there's risk there, and that his role is so unique with the Chargers. And his game is predicated on like so much reception volume and so many TDs that I could just see that falling off for him as he starts to, hit his upper 20s at the running back position. And then Kenneth Walker for Seattle, who I was down on in Dynasty last year. I was up on in redraft, just kind of based on the differing costs. But now that he's RB6 and he's going in the second round, he's just the type of running back I'd much rather take a swing at a wide receiver on at that point, where you're betting on a lot of efficiency. I know Geno was awesome last year, but I do think there's possibility he regresses from last year. And the pass catching profile for Walker is still somewhat up in the air. I'm not saying he can't do it, but it's a little bit of a question mark for a guy that's going very early in drafts.
We've talked about our concerns with Kenneth Walker in the second round, Billy as well. Any guys you want to talk about here in the first and second?
Yeah, Bijan we already mentioned. I'll skip that one right now. But mine was Kenneth Walker. I have him at right now as my running back 11 in redraft rankings, and I don't like where he's going. And I agree with what Mike said. Efficiency is bound to have some regression here, right? We saw like his breakaway rate was just astronomical, right? We just don't expect that to continue. I I'm looking at, his snap share. His snap share, I think, will be relatively similar to what we saw last year, maybe a slight increase, but he's going to have to, maintain, if not increase efficiencies in order to give, I always say investors a return on their draft capital. I just don't see it happening with Seattle. And I agree with Mike. I think that we do see some regression with Geno as well, and just this offense as a whole. So I'm not in on him at ADP.
It seems like all of the Seahawks have been steamed up, especially when you compare them from last year. We had JJ Zachariason on, Billy, and he talked about him as a dynasty sell for these very reasons. I think it's just more likely that when you look at where Kenneth Walker is going in that second round, he's more likely to finish closer to Nick Chubb. You can make an argument for Nick Chubb over Kenneth Walker, and you're getting Nick Chubb that much later. And I think that's kind of a little bit more of what he profiles to be. I don't see a scenario where Seattle's just going to come out and set the world on fire in terms of putting up a ton of fantasy points. I think last year is about where they'll be this year. And I see a number of issues with taking him there. I know it's going to be an unpopular kind of opinion to some people, but I'm also not thrilled with taking Jonathan Taylor right now in that first round because I have major concerns about that offense as a whole. And we already saw last year, and I think Taylor, if you told me I could get him 7 picks later, I'd be about it. But when you're talking about like where he's going right now in these early FFPC drafts, the opportunity cost of taking Taylor, over a couple of these wide receivers that we really love, it's just something that I can't do. I think Taylor could go up points per game wise, like 5 points per game, and get closer to like that 17, 18 points per game this year. But I think at the end of the day, I would rather take a wide receiver that I think is going to be north of 20 points per game. Just curious what your two guys' thoughts are on Taylor. Maybe start with you, Mike, Taylor and Indianapolis right now.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I don't have a great read on the Colts right now. Kind of we'll see what direction they go in the draft and with the new coaching staff. And it's difficult. We're kind of bullish on JT right now just because we really like his prospect profile, his big playability. I think he showed enough in the receiving game where, kind of like Walker, like that was a little bit of a red flag, but I think he's shown a little bit more there that we feel a little bit better about it. So we're kind of high on JT right now in our ranks over at ETR, but I wouldn't say I feel super confident in it, really. It's something that I'll probably dig in a little bit deeper, kind of tempted to just drop him down a little bit, quite frankly.
Billy, tell me I'm wrong.
I think you're wrong. I'm also higher on him. I think it breaks down to just opportunity share, right? He's going to see one of the highest opportunity shares at the position in the league. This offense is going to be funneled through him and Pittman. I think we can call this a pretty, clear funnel between the two. When you take a look, the offensive line is a slight bit of concern, I think, and of course, the quarterback situation is another. That being said, whenever we see this with teams, they typically favor the run. So as long as he is healthy and on the field, we're probably going to see upwards of 65, 70% snap share. We saw 69.5% last year. His route participation last year was 56.4%, which was top 7. If we can see that opportunity remain, which I expect, I think I have him top 3 as my running back position. So I think that it's definitely in line for him to continue his dominancy that we saw in 2021. His injury set him back last year. And I think that as long as he can get over that injury hurdle and, get fresh start here in 2023, I think that we could look at him as being another, one of the top backs in the league again. I think it's just going to break down to his health, because if his body can uphold this amount of touches and carries, he could be in line for a monster season.
I think that the argument against myself would be, do we see an increased use for him as a receiver this year? Because this is the first year you enter into a Jonathan Taylor season without a Nyheim Hines behind him. And, a perceived backup like a Deion Jackson, that's not the kind of player that's going to siphon targets. So I think that's the scenario where he kind of crushes his ADP, is he's used a little bit more as a receiver than we can anticipate. One offense last year that we absolutely loved for fantasy was the Miami Dolphins. It was as consolidated a target tree as you're ever going to get, and we had very predictable weekly usage from Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. This year, both players have steamed up ADP-wise, and deservedly so. I think they earned it. But now you're talking about taking Tyreek Hill in the middle of the first round. You're talking about taking Jalen Waddle in the top 15. I'm in on both of those guys, but I'm curious, Mike, do you have any trepidation to Miami mixing in a third receiver, maybe through the draft? Maybe somebody just develops and they become a little less predictable in terms of how consolidated it is. Any hesitation on those two?
I really don't. I think the way Mike McDaniel wants to run this offense, he's going to figure out a way to get the ball to his playmakers, and he understands the top two guys. I don't think he's someone that's concerned with spreading it around. I think he wants to get the ball to Waddle. He wants to get the ball to Tyreek Hill. I guess the minor concern would more be that, like, if defenses are able to adjust to what Miami's doing to be able to funnel the guys, the ball at such a high target per route run rate that they had last year. But ultimately, I'm very comfortable taking these guys where they're going in drafts, even with them both being really, early picks. I mean, you have to take, as you said, Tyreek's wide receiver 4, Jalen Waddle's wide receiver 11 at like the 2-3 turn. I'm fine with both of them. They were lights out when Tua played last year. I just expect more of the same.
I agree with Mike. The thing that makes these two so dynamic and what's going to be hard for defenses to even adjust, to Mike's point, is the speed, right? Both in the 4-3 range. Defenses can adjust to, different schemes, but it's very hard to adjust for speed because you can't catch them. And if one's beating you one way, the other one's going to beat you the same way, but with the same quickness and the same speed. So I think we're going to see a very similar looking offense. We saw them bring back both dusty running backs, right? We have... There's a lot less concern. Gesicki's now out of the equation as well. They're more than likely to have a rookie tight end into the equation. They're talking about getting rid of what's his name, Wilson, right? And so this could even open up even a more condensed distribution of targets between these two as they mix in rookies into the fold. And so I think that we're in line for another big season from both Waddle and Tyreek. And I'll be the first to say I was wrong on Waddle last year. I didn't think he was going to be able to do it with Tyreek there. I misproportionately projected Edmonds to be that kind of behind the line of scrimmage target, and it didn't happen. And so this year, I think it's very clear that it's Tyreek, and it's very clear it's going to be Waddle. And I think both of them are going to be able to, produce those round 1 and round 2 returns.
Yeah, I love both of them. I think that they're tremendously priced. I've had this conversation with Billy about how in these FFPC, especially the best ball formats, pushing Tyreek Hill up to the 103 behind Chase and Jefferson. I'm considering doing that, and I've done it a few times. And then Waddle, I think he's got ceiling for growth because we saw him sub 120 targets last year. I think it's very easy to kind of project him to get up to 130 this year. Tyreek, I think north of 160, but Waddle, I think, has room for growth. So I'm in on both of those guys. Want to touch on another wide receiver. I know Billy and I both drafted the hell out of him last year, and Stefon Diggs was one of Billy's guys last year. Mike, I know you were big time on Diggs last year, and you were a big Buffalo Bills fan. How insulated is he in returning to the exact same role this year in Buffalo? Right now, he's wide receiver 5 overall. What are your views on him at cost?
Yeah, I think he's priced pretty much appropriately. I did last year and again this year, honestly, have a slight preference for Devontae Adams over Stefon Diggs, which I think is somewhat contrary to the market. That's a little thing because it's not like I'm bearish on Diggs. It's more that I'm bullish on Adams. I think Diggs' season last year was basically the combination of his first 2 seasons. He ran really hot his first year in Buffalo. He ran kind of bad. If you just look at his catch rate, it was 77% his first year in Buffalo, dropped all the way to 63% last year, and then it was right in the middle this past season at 70%. So I think we're just going to get more of the same. I do at some point, start to worry. I think he's fine entering his age 30 season, but without Dable there, the offense at times, I wouldn't say struggle. Struggle is the wrong word. They were I think second in the entire NFL in point differential, but I just worry a little bit about how committed they are to being super pass happy. And it seemed like teams adjusted to Dorsey the second half of the year. So I have some tiny concerns there, but ultimately have no issues taking him, where he's going in drafts at the 1-2 turn. And I think the FFPC market right now is too low, probably on both Diggs and Adams. I think those receivers should be going in round 1, not in round 2.
Be a nice 1-2 turn though, Mike, for you.
Oh,
That
yeah.
1-2 turn is available for you right there. It seems like every year there's a period of time where you can draft Diggs and Devontae, both of them at the same time. Billy, anything to add on Stefon Diggs?
Yeah, I agree. He's also, priced accordingly. When you take a look, I think my biggest concern with Diggs is just his overall snap share. 78.2% last year. When you look at the elites like Justin Jefferson, saw 91.5%. You see Jamar Chase 93.1%. CeeDee Lamb is even 87.2%. Cooper Kupp 95%. It's hard to outproduce players when they're on the field, 15 to 16% more of the time than you are, just from a numbers perspective. I would like to touch base on Davante Adams just because I'm lower on him than I have been in years of the past. I've always loved Davante Adams, but being a Niner fan, I've seen Jimmy Garoppolo play for the last few years, and I have concerns with how they're going to get the ball to him and how this offense is going to run. Like I joked around and said that they're going to hurt his back because they're constantly going to be throwing at his feet. But I think that's it. This is a great discussion because I'd love to get Mike's thoughts on Davante Adams, how he anticipates this offense to look with Jimmy Garoppolo, and how this distribution of targets are going to break down.
I think when you're at a talent level of Davante Adams, I'm only concerned about quarterback if it's real bad. And as much flack as Jimmy G has taken, I know he hasn't played in like any pass happy offenses. Like the efficiency on an attempt basis is pretty good for him. So I think it's a downgrade from Carr, but I don't have it in that significant downgrade bucket where I'm super concerned. Everyone was concerned, or a lot of people were concerned about Adams last year going from Rodgers to Carr. And like then he goes out and puts up 180 targets, sets a career high. He's utilized so amazingly in the red zone, given his skill set, that for a receiver, he's pretty predictable guy that you can kind of pencil in for 10 plus touchdowns. And in terms of target share, like they lost Darren Waller. I don't even know how much that matters. I think he's just going to be a guy that's always earning like 30+% of his team's targets. So I feel pretty good about Adams until, he kind of starts to prove me wrong. And his game was a little different last year, right? It was a career high in yards per catch by a large number. His catch rate dropped off a little bit. I kind of think those things will level off a little bit where, his catch rate starts to come back up and he racks up some more PPR points, probably isn't quite as efficient, but that's fine for us for fantasy purposes.
So it's hard to believe. I look at the Raiders and I would have thought that they ran the ball close to 50% of the time, and they actually only ran the ball 40.8% of the time. We have Jacobs who's playing on his franchise tag again. Would you expect them to just run him into the ground here in 2023 and see that rush share increase closer to 50% and that pass go down closer to 50%? I mean, we have the addition of Jacoby Myers, and I know he's not, Darren Waller in terms of, size and what he's going to be able to do, create mismatches here, but they do have Hunter Renfrow, who was injured all year last year. They have Jacoby Myers coming back. They could potentially be running Josh Jacobs into the ground. Are you not concerned with any of that? You think we're just going to continue to funnel to Davante Adams?
I think in terms of running back touches, they'll run Josh Jacobs into the ground, but I don't know. I don't think their running back touches are going to be like outsized. I think they'll throw the ball at a similar rate that they did last year. I don't think they're probably going to swing too wildly one way or the other. I could be wrong on that. There's probably more downside risk than upside risk than upside reward in the pass rate, but I think it'll be around like 60 to 62% called pass plays.
Yeah, it's not that I'm like exceptionally low on Adams. I still have him as a wide receiver 7. I have him right behind Diggs, right? Just when you mix in the running backs, it gets him at the back end of 1 to 2 turn. I think that's reasonable. I don't think it's egregious by any standpoint, but I do love to see other people's opinions because I was lower on him last year and I was wrong, right? And here I am going into 2023 and I have a similar take, but now I'm even lower than I was last year, and I just want to make sure I'm covering the bases.
Most zoomed out take on Adams would just be there's not that many guys in today's day and age that are going to earn like 33% target shares. He's like one of 3 guys, maybe, like not even that's gonna do that.
And I'll agree with Mike. I think Adams is appropriately priced. I think that he's more likely to, finish inside the top 5 than he is to finish outside of the top 10 because he's got the outsized target share. And I think that you also could. I hate making a bull argument for a Josh McDaniel-led team, but you had a lot of inconsistency game to game with that offense. You had a couple of absolute duds. I mean, that Rams game is kind of like the one that kind of very much comes to mind. There was a couple of games down the stretch where they really struggled and a couple of games where they played very well. So I think you could have a little more consistency in year 2. And there's also self-preservation for all these NFL coaches. McDaniels needs to have a decent season, and getting Davante Adams the ball and making him the focal point is their best chance of success on the field. So I'll take a bullish approach with Adams. Let's stick with wide receivers here, guys. We often see a perceived wide receiver 2 return great value versus their higher drafted teammate. It's happened many times over the past few years, and it's helped people win fantasy leagues. Cooper Kupp often went right behind Robert Woods in 2021. In the same season, Deebo Samuel went behind Brandon Ayuk, and Jamar Chase went behind T. Higgins. That was a massive year for it. Last year was less dramatic, but we still saw some very big hits, such as Garrett Wilson, dusting Elijah Moore, and Chris Godwin outscoring Mike Evans. Let's go around the horn here. We'll start with Mike. We'll move to Billy. Who would you rather draft at cost right now? A.J. Brown at wide receiver 6 or Devonta Smith at wide receiver 13? Starting with Mike.
I'm going to go Devonta Smith. I think they're kind of 1A, 1B. I know A.J. Brown's got a little bit more of an alpha vibe to him, but you just look at the target shares over the course of the season. I think they're 1A and 1B, so I'll just take the discount and price tag.
Billy.
I agree. Yep. It's exactly the same thing. I can get the similar production at around later.
I'm good with both, but yes, I'll go Devonta Smith. I think Billy and I've touched on what a fantastic value he is. When Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle are gone, Devonta Smith might be the best pick you can make in the second round. Let's keep this going. We just talked about it. Tyreek Hill, who had 170 targets last year, and his teammate Jalen Waddle, who had 115. Right now, Tyreek Hill's wide receiver 3, Jalen Waddle's wide receiver 11. Mike.
This one's tough because I like them both so much, but there's just more meat on the bone for Waddle to outproduce his ADP, and I think those targets at the end of the day are going to be a little bit closer than they were last season.
Billy,
can I just trade back and just collect extra picks here in the second and third round? I'm always going to go for the discount, right? But if I know it's hard, it's hard to take especially when they're this close, right? Especially when we're looking at snap share, we're looking at target distribution, we're looking at the overall involvement in the offense. Both these guys are like the 1A and 1B. I'm going to always go with the 1B when I can get the discount.
They're both such good values. Waddle, I love your take, Mike. And if you think that the targets are going to be closer, Waddle might be the league winner this year based on what he did last year with 115. If somehow he gets up to 140, then it's just wheels up for Jalen Waddle this year. Absolutely just crushing. And he's the younger player. Again, I still love Tyreek Hill, though, in that first round. That's a very difficult one. Here's one where I know where Billy's going to be at. Mike Williams, who's going around wide receiver 20, or Keenan Allen, who's going around wide receiver 25.
I'm going to go Keenan Allen. Again, it's discount, but I just think like full PPR format too, especially like FFPC, that he's probably going to outproduce. There's a little bit less very high end upside for Keenan, but with Kellen Moore coming there too, I'm pretty bullish that the targets are just going to be so good for him.
Billy.
Mike and I are mind melding today. Yeah, we did this debate on Man vs. Machine as well. I was on the side of Keenan Allen simply from a target standpoint. He's eclipsed 150 targets 3 times since 2017. He's been over 130 every year since, except for last year being injured, where Mike Williams only eclipsed 100 once since 2017. It was 2021. Every other time he's been 93 or less in his entire career. I love Kellen Moore in this offense this year. I'm high on the Chargers just in general, but I think it's going to benefit Keenan Allen and his for him to command more targets again. And I'm going to go PPR with Keenan Allen.
Yeah, and Keenan Allen's a more predictable player week to week, which I like, and I think that the range he's going in drafts, I can draft him as my wide receiver 3, or and have put him in the flex, and I love doing that with a player like Keenan Allen. Let me come back to this one though, guys.
Can I add a
How
third
about-
in there? Palmer, right? Because both these players are injury risks. We know that Keenan Allen is possible for soft tissue at any point. I always joke around and say Mike Williams is the only player in the NFL who could land on his head and his ass in the same play, right? And he's always potentially getting hurt. Where Palmer, as the wide receiver 3 going late in drafts, has an opportunity like he did last year to step into a number 1 role at any given point in the season, at least a number 2 role in one of the most pass heaviest offenses in the league. Now with Kellen Moore, who's always ran a top 5 in the NFL with, total plays and scoring. And so I think the sneaky answer here is Palmer.
I like that one, Billy. I want to come back to this though real quick. We talk in redraft context. How about in a best ball context, Mike? Are you more likely to draft Mike Williams when these two are presented, or you'd still lean Keenan Allen?
FFPC best ball, I'm still probably leaning Keenan Allen. I don't make huge adjustments in best ball on kind of like this spike week stuff. It's been kind of unpredictable historically that we're able to do that. I think like in a half PPR format, it makes sense to flip them and go to Mike Williams in best ball, given the big play upside and everything. But I still think I'd go Keenan Allen at cost.
If you use the fantasy, if you use our tool over at Player Profiler, down in the efficiency column, we have best ball points added. Keenan Allen is number 26 and Mike Williams is 27.
I don't know if I'm even allowed to ask this one because we really like Amon-Ra St. Brown here on First Class Fantasy, but Amon-Ra St. Brown going around wide receiver 10 or Jameson Williams and the mystery box at wide receiver 28.
Yeah, you're not allowed to ask this question. Let's go to the next one.
Mike.
So I'm finally going to take the wide receiver one. I'm going to go Amon-Ra over the mystery box here. I'm a little worried Jameson Williams is going to be a lot better in terms of real life impact and fantasy impact as a field stretcher. And, maybe I've unfairly kind of pigeonholed him in that role and he could just command more volume than I'm expecting and make the big plays. But, that was kind of happening, like with Ruggs, that was happening for a little bit where I was really down on him and we started to see the upside before the off the field stuff occurred. And that, could be Jameson Williams where he does start to command enough volume that it's worth it. But I think Amon-Ra is just so safe in a full PPR format. He's just shown to be incredibly talented and command those high target shares.
I love Amon-Ra. I mean, we talked about with Billy, for weeks now. He's a guy I'm considering in the end of the first round, and I love it when he falls to the second. Billy, I'm sorry I insulted you with this question.
I honestly think I always get attacked for making these kind of statements, but I think it's hilarious. So I'm going to do another one. I think the question should be phrased: is it Jameson Williams or Marvin Jones now at this late in the draft? Because Marvin Jones continues to produce, and I have this weird affinity for Marvin Jones.
You do,
but
Billy.
You're
a Marvin Jones guy for years.
But he's always been sneaky good, right? He's always produced, especially in best ball. And so it's a lot harder to, click the start button in a redraft league, but in a best ball league, he's been able to produce. And it's been, ever since he re-signed here, I've been adding him the 20th round, like clockwork again.
Here's one that's a little bit more interesting. Terry McLaurin at wide receiver 27 or Jahan Dotson, who's going around, let's call him wide receiver 39, wide receiver 40, depending on where you're drafting. Mike.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Dotson, kind of hope for the year 2 breakout here for him. He was better in the second half of the season, the first half of the season. We saw, the touchdowns throughout the course of the year. And, with Bieniemy coming over, kind of just some hope that this offense is a little bit better overall. And yeah, I think I'll take him. I mean, I still like McLaurin. I think they're both might be a little bit undervalued right now, but I'll definitely take the discount and the reduced opportunity cost in draft.
Billy.
I like them both. I probably lean McLaurin in this scenario just because of the snap share. He's on the field 90% of the time. Mm-hmm. I think that we'll see Dotson, eclipse closer to the 80 range this year. He was in 75s last year. He was very efficient. He was used a lot in the red zone packages as well. I like Dotson a lot. I think it's one of my most owned players, but I also just really like Terry McLaurin and him commanding target share. So we saw 22.6% target share last year, wasn't exceptional, but I do think that they know they need to give him the ball more. We take a look at the game logs and their success that they had in games. It was when they kind of forced him the ball more down the field and made, he made coming out and making plays. So I don't think he's, a player that's going to, get 200 yards any given game, but I do think that he could command a little bit more targets this year.
I'm going to go Dotson because I think he's 4 years younger, and we saw a top 20 draft capital. And I love the fact that Dotson played very well to start the year, gets injured, and a lot of rookies would kind of end their season. It would be hard for them to kind of get back, but he actually played some of his best ball down the stretch. We were starting him in the fantasy playoffs. Guys, I want to quickly touch on second-year wide receiver. It's been a cheat code for drafters year in, year out. The last year we had a massive ADP hit in Devonta Smith, but also some duds in Kadarius Toney and Elijah Moore. Mike, what is one second-year wide receiver that you really want to draft a lot of this year?
Right now, it's the guy we just talked about. Like Dotson's kind of the top of my list relative to ADP, I think. The top three of the class are insane in terms of like expectation when you're looking at Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Drake London. But when you start to account for their situations, like I think they're all being drafted kind of correctly. Olave is the one guy I could maybe see where he might be closer to Garrett Wilson than the market has, but it just, I don't know. It just seems like the market's valuing those guys correctly. The costs are so high. So I think I'll go Dotson. I was tempted to say Treylon Burks, but you mentioned you did something with JJ Zachariason recently. His prospect guide's great. He's got a year 2 model that comes out, and he actually has Dotson ahead of Burks. And that's kind of a good check on my biases because I wanted Burks to happen last year, and I think I kind of need to reassess expectations there, and I'll lean into Dotson's more productive rookie season.
He also has an interesting Garrett Wilson ranking, not what we would predict on that second year. So we highly recommend that guide that JJ put out. Billy, your thoughts on the second year wideouts? We've talked about this for weeks. There's so many good answers here.
There is. I'm going to go really deep and go John Mechie. I talked about him in an earlier podcast, and we look at this wide receiver core of the Houston Texans, and it's leaves a lot to be desired. He was a second round pick just a year ago. Unfortunate cancer situation. Looking like he's going to be ready for camp this year. He could potentially become the number one in this offense based upon what they have at the position. I think it's kind of a sneaky play. He's going really, really, really late in drafts. I mean, FFPC ADP right now is pick 192, right? And so the upside that he presents at that point in the draft is it's definitely a difference maker.
Yeah, I love that answer. I love the Drake London, Christian Watson tier. They're usually drafted close to one another, and I could see both of them just smashing their ADPs this year. But like Mike makes a great argument for Jahan Dotson based on where he's going. It's a class we want to embrace.
Would like to say also that I also have Dotson ranked ahead in my projections ahead of Treylon Burks, also Pickens as well, and it just breaks down to expected pass plays what those numbers break down to.
So last year, Mike kind of famously was the least disgusted, Josh Jacobs drafter. I don't want to say you were pounding the table for him, but you made a case for him, and it kind of stuck. And we've talked about this a few times, Mike. That range has always, been the tricky one. Some drafters would avoid that dead zone entirely. We've started to see more hits out of it. Last year, Pollard also came out of that dead zone, did quite well. Who's your favorite running back right now who's going drafted? And we'll give it a wide range here. Let's go rounds 3 through 8.
Yeah, I think just like first of all, like macro, like the costs on some of these dead zone running backs are changing, which was kind of the thing with Jacobs. Instead of going round 5 last year, you go round 7, 8, and then it's like, okay, and Billy does projections work, and it's like you don't want to over rely on projected volume because like it can go away in a hurry at running back, but at a certain point, if a guy's going to get touches, like he has upside, and then all of a sudden Josh Jacobs just plays a little bit better than expected. So I was on the Ship Chasing show last night with Pat Crane and Peter Oversted. We were actually kind of talking about who's this year's Josh Jacobs, and a few names came up, but Cam Akers and James Conner kind of, stick out to me. I just don't see any way the Rams are bringing in any competition at running back. They just don't really have the resources to spend draft capital on that position. So There's no competition. He was pretty good at the end of last year, and we've seen McVay willing to give him a workhorse role. So I like that. I think Connor might be able to squeeze out one more of this kind of like, might be like a lost year for Arizona, and he could just be a big volume bet. Like we're talking like round 10 for James Conner, right? Like,
yeah.
And that's the same thing with Jacobs. Like, do I want it like a round 6 James Conner? Absolutely not. Do I want like round 9 or 10? Like, sure. Yeah, I'll take that volume bet.
I'm starting to dive into David Montgomery in that 5th round. I think that there's a chance that David Montgomery has his best overall season as a pro based on the quality of the Detroit offense. The guy landed very, very well. It's been a player who I've always kind of faded, and he had his highest yards per catch last year, and I think he's going to be a little he's underrated as a receiver. We all saw what Jamal Williams was able to do in a thumper role. Do I think David Montgomery is going to get that many touchdowns? No, but I think David Montgomery can rush for 8 to 10 touchdowns with a decent amount of yards and also find a few receiving touchdowns. So I think David Montgomery's a really nice bet in that Detroit offense, as long as he doesn't rise into that 4th round, and then I'm probably out. Billy?
You guys took 2 of the 3 I had. There's 2 names I want to throw out here for folks. One is going earlier than the 2 you mentioned. One is going much later. The first one is Dameon Pierce, who's been falling down draft boards, surprisingly, even though they only got Singletary in there. And he was RB6 in opportunity share last year, 73.8%. Snap share, he saw 63.8% of snaps. So we're talking about a top 15 back inside opportunity, top 10 or almost top 5 inside total opportunity share. Again, I think that this offense is not going to be great. So I do think that he may be hindered in the run game, but he ran hard last year. I liked what he was able to do from a touch standpoint as a rookie. I expect him to kind of build upon that in 2023. And the other name that's kind of sneaky that no one's really talking about is Damian Harris. I love the landing spot in Buffalo. Love the opportunity he's going to get on a game script level, right? We're expecting them to see a lot of positive game scripts that's going to benefit Damian Harris in the rushing game. I do expect them to get Cook more involved this year, but I could see a significant role for Damian in red zone packages, goal line work, and 1-2 downs. And I think that they've been missing that back. That's kind of that Damian Harris brings that skill set, and people forget that Damian Harris also has pass catching ability as well. And so I think that he's kind of a sneaky play that's going real late in drafts. He's going to pick 117 right now. He's starting to climb upwards, but it hasn't happened faster than I thought.
Speed round, fellas, because we got to get Mike out of here in about 5 minutes. Right now, Mike, we've seen quarterbacks steam up. Okay, so the especially the big 3, they're all going very highly, and the quarterbacks right behind them have already gotten pulled up towards that range. Who is the very best quarterback value right now on the board?
Yeah, one of my favorite values on the board is Daniel Jones. I think the Giants offense takes another step. I think they put more on his shoulders. They just had so much wide receiver inconsistency last year. I do like outside of the top 3 quarterbacks, I think Lamar Jackson still, like, I kind of buy the dip on him while there's some uncertainty.
Yeah, Lamar was mine. He's actually my quarterback 4 in seasonal projections, and it's all based on the uncertainty. If we knew he was playing today, he's going in the top 5 like clockwork. In the underdog best ball drafts right now in Superflex, he's going at the tail end of round 1, which to me is just crazy. I'm going to take that value all day.
Yeah, I think Lamar is a great call by you, Billy. I like your Daniel Jones call, and I'll also throw out Deshaun Watson, who I think is going to get pushed down to a range where he could really beat things. I don't think quarterback 1 is in the range of outcomes, but I do think that there's a chance he could give us a top 5 season. That kind of segues to my next question. We oftentimes should take a step back, and instead of trying to do what we're doing here with the players, try to pick an offense that can really beat expectations. Mike, give me an offense that you think right now is very underrated that could push a number of players to beat their ADPs.
Yeah, I like the Jaguars offense. Looking at the ADPs on both Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley, we have them as values. Billy, when we were talking about tight ends, was kind of talking about Evan Ingram, like kind of waiting on him. And Trevor Lawrence could just be really, really good. We kind of already saw the second half of last year. They caught fire a little bit. They could put a lot on his plate. So I'll go with the Jaguars. I think to a much lesser extent, like a more boring version would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's more just based on ADP costs. But in some of the super flex stuff, you've been able to stack Baker with like Godwin and Evans at like super, super affordable price tags. I know the FFP super flex tournament's starting at the end of the month, and that's one I'll be looking at to kind of tack on late.
There's a reason you can stack Baker quite easily, though, Mike. Billy, give me an offense that's going to beat it.
Chargers this year, man. I'm all in on the Chargers and the offense. Love the Kellen Moore addition. I think what he brings to the table. Lombardi finally out. I think that that's going to open up this offense. They're going to get more creative. Lombardi continued to force things that didn't work, where I think Kellen Moore gets creative, and we saw what he was able to do in Dallas, consistently being in the top 5 in multiple categories in total offense and total scoring. So I think that even if 75-80% of that follows over, which I expect more of it will, but even if we did see a regression in those categories, this Chargers offense is still going to be fire because the expected pass play is one of the best in the league.
I'll stay with Cleveland. I think that Cleveland's going to play faster. I think Cleveland is going to pass the ball more, and I think that offense takes a big step forward. And then Justin Fields has been steamed up, but I think the Chicago offense could beat expectations this year and score a lot more. But certainly going to score more than they did last year, but I think they could score a lot more. They have a tremendous amount of speed at the wide receiver position. They're be efficient running the ball. It's year 2 for Mike Eberflus. Mike, you've been very generous with your time here. Before we get you out of here, give us one player who you think is the best ADP value on the board. You can take it to redraft. You can take it to best ball. Give us one player that you think is an absolute steal right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stick with the Jaguars stuff. I think Christian Kirk is, an absolute steal right now. I think people are undervaluing, again, what the Jaguars could do just overall as a team in terms of pass rate and scoring efficiency. And then I also think like the Ridley addition is distracting people from how solid Kirk was last year. And I think sometimes people have these solid seasons and it's like, oh, he had a really good season, but he wasn't amazing. And now it's just going to get tougher for him. And like, there's a less sexy narrative behind him, but basically he's just got to go out, kind of do what he did last year, and then a little bit more efficiency, a little bit more team success. And he could be a top 10, 15 wide receiver. He's going as wide receiver 27 on FFPC right now.
Love that. He's getting pushed. The fact that Ridley and him are even close to me just doesn't make sense. I think that Kirk is tremendous value. Billy, what do you have coming up this week in terms of the Dominator?
Dominator, got James Brimacombe, a.k.a. Eagles, coming on. We're actually going to record today. It's going to go live tomorrow. Be talking about best ball values and strategies, roster construction, and how to build winning squads for best ball.
And Billy and I will be back next week with Jared Smola of Draft Sharks, another very sharp guest coming on First Class Fantasy. I mean, we're bringing it guest-wise, guys. Stick with us all offseason. Mike, let everybody know where they can find you once again.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at 2hats1mike. You can listen to my podcast, Establish the Edge, on iTunes, wherever you find your podcast. And then also all my work's up on Establish to Run, contributing to the rankings there for all formats, working on, again, a big best ball series for Underdog Best Ball Mania. So make sure to check that out.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us, Mike. We'll see everybody here back next week.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.